I think sometimes people think para-athletics is something different. And I'm like, it's not, it's just athletics. It's just the people who are competing are a little bit different. Like, if you're a fan of athletics, you're a fan of all athletics, whether that's para-athletics or not. I think it's bigger than just any individual athlete. It's kind of like, okay, well, the more people see of para-athletics or para-athletes when they're tuned into this stuff, the more opportunity it creates for people to say like, oh, maybe there's a space in this sport for me, or like, oh, I could do that, or, you know what I mean? It's just like representation is important and we know that, so why not push to do it more? Sometimes people can think para-sport or the Paralympics is like participation-based sport, and it like, couldn't be further from that. Like, it's high-performance sport for people with disabilities. It's not take part for people with disabilities. Like, give people the context for it, give people the buy-in, give them the opportunity to understand it, you know?
Who is Orla Comerford?
I'm Orla. I suppose I'm an athlete, but I'm more than that. I think it's really easy to get caught up in like your identity as an athlete and lose yourself in that and be like, that's all I am and that's who I am. So I think it's been a really important part of like my career to try and identify myself outside of it, that like, okay, I'm Orla and athletics is an incredibly huge part of my life, but it's not everything. You know, I'm myself outside of it. I'm a friend, I'm a sister, you know, I'm an artist, I'm a whole person, but athletics is certainly a huge part of me.
Orla came into this world in a rush and she never stopped going. She has two brothers. She was always really, really competitive. Anything they could do, she could do.
She was full of beans and full of energy and full of go and fun as well, you know, fun.
Athletics would have been big, so, you know, that was something that Orla kind of chose herself. She was playing tennis, she was in the Scouts, she was doing a lot of the local activities here. And then when she went to school, that brought on a whole new element, basketball and things like that. So she tried everything.
I understood quite early that the running element of any of those other things was what I enjoyed. When we were playing games in yard and you were chasing someone, that was the part I liked. And I remember saying to my mum, like, I just wish there was a sport where that's what you did. Like, you could just run. She's like, let me tell you about athletics.
Oh, where can I do that? Can I join up to do that? So I joined her up with Raheny Shamrocks was the closest athletics clubs to here. And she started running and she just loved it.
She was very cheeky and full of energy. And I had a laugh and I said to her, listen, me and you are going to go to the Olympics. I said it to most of the kids.
She always did well, no matter any race she went in. So she would always have medalled. So there would have been loads of medals even when she was a small child. Yeah, Orla just found her own way and found what she loved and just kept driving on with that.
And I remember getting to run on my first race here in Santry and like the excitement about it, the buzz. I think it was like, you know, the girls 70 metre instead of the 100 metre, we were so small. And just each year coming back and being able to do the competitions, that's what I really loved. And to be honest, like, it wasn't about winning or losing, because there were a couple of years in a row where like I would win nothing, and then there might be a year or two where I'd win everything and then I'd go back to winning nothing. It kind of fluctuated. And I think that was also like a good thing for me in terms of keeping me in the sport, that I understood like, okay, well, like sometimes it's not your year, it's not your day, but like it'll come back around if you keep turning up and you keep putting the work in.
I think the penny dropped for her and realised that if you train, you'll get better. If you work at it, you'll achieve more out of it. So I think that once she had the sort of maturity to realise that herself, I think then it starts to take off for her, yeah.
I started to understand kind of like, you know, my strengths and weaknesses, and I started to understand that like athletics made me feel confident about who I was off the track and all of that kind of stuff. So I think that was a really important time and sort of like the foundation of building me into the athlete I then became later.
Orla just worked hard. I once said to her, listen, a lot of these kids are here for fun. You have something if you want it, you know. You have the skill, but that's only maybe 30% of it, you know. You got to work hard. The 3 days were the dream, determination and dedication. And they said, and demo, you know what I mean? Yeah, but Muhammad Ali, you know, said that, you know, the will has to be stronger than the skill. It doesn't matter how many times you fall down once you get up again. Isn't that right, Muhammad Ali?
I think you're in 5th class, so you get diagnosed with this eye condition that impacts the central vision. Is that right?
So I had my summer holidays, no problem. Like, we go up to Donegal every summer. So like, there's no TVs, no screens, anything up there. We'd just be on the beach every day or on the bikes running around the place. So I had a fairly carefree summer. There was no real like signs or anything. And I went back to school then in 5th class, and day 1, couldn't read my books and I couldn't read the teacher's handwriting. And I was like, that's so weird. We had a new teacher. I remember saying to one of the lads, like, oh, it's crazy. His writing is so small. And they're like, no, it's not. I was like, oh, okay, I can't see that. But again, like, no real alarm bells. Like, my mum wears glasses. So I was like, oh, I probably need glasses or something. So went home, told her, went about kind of finding out. You know, the first person we went to was like, I don't know if there's anything wrong with her eyesight. Like, maybe she's pretending because she wants like a trendy pair of glasses or something. And my parents were like, she's not that kind of kid. So they were like, no, okay, they took it seriously and they took me to someone else. And then basically we found out that I had Stargardt's, which is basically a degenerative condition. So it means that you lose eyesight over time. So I had lived 11 years with no kind of deterioration. And then obviously over that summer, there'd been a significant deterioration in quite a small time period, but I just hadn't noticed it, maybe because the things where I would notice it weren't present, you know?
We'd never heard of Stargardt's before either, and I'm sure most people have never heard of Stargardt's disease. And it's a genetic disorder, so in a sense it was a genetic lottery.
For us, that was devastating. You know, she wanted to know, well, what's it going to be like?
Our very first question was, will the world go black? No, it won't go black. In your case, it won't go black, but because what happens in Orla's, she's lost the center of her field of vision, so she will always have peripheral vision.
We learned at an early stage that crossing the road was not actually a big issue for her, because she could see on the right and she could see on the left. The center, she was more likely to walk into something in front of her than she was in something on either side, you know? What she would find difficult is someone maybe across the road say, "Hi, Orla," and she'll go, "Hi." Even when she was younger, and she'd say, "Who's that?" She wouldn't have a clue. Wouldn't have a clue unless she recognised the voice.
For me, the dramatic change was I had large print books in school and a laptop, and I was like, oh, this is the worst. Like, I'm going to stick out like a sore thumb. Like, people are going to think this or that of me or whatever. And like, I think about it now as like, it's almost like a bit funny. I was like thinking about these like really stupid kind of trivial things that were like hugely important as an 11-year-old. But like, my parents were like, what's her life gonna look like? Like, what jobs can she have? Can she be independent? You know, all this stuff. Like, I think for them, it was actually a far more traumatizing time period than it was for me, to be honest. I think it then became maybe more of a realization for me as I got older and as I started to realize, okay, well, all my friends are learning to drive and I can't learn to drive. And then in school, when the careers teacher is asking you, like, what do you want to do? And you start to maybe assess, like, oh, I actually might not be able to do that and stuff like that. So that maybe the realizations for me came a little bit later, whereas my parents dealt with all of that in the one moment as I was diagnosed. So I actually always think about that time as being kind of way worse for them than for me.
You don't expect your child to have a disability. I mean, initially I was absolutely heartbroken for her. All I could see initially were the negatives, you know. I saw the dis in disability rather than the ability. But once I got past the fear and the worry, and I saw how she was treating it, actually, her dad said to me, "Don't ever let her see you upset." And he was right. He said, you know, she needs to be able to understand that this is not the end of the world for her, you know. You might feel it is at the moment, and I did at that particular point in time. But God, how wrong she proved me, you know.
I am certainly very stubborn, so I didn't like the idea of people telling me what I could and couldn't do.
You would at the beginning have said, well, will I read that out for you? And she'll say, no. And she'll photograph it. And then she'll go through it until she finds it. That was the other way she got around the buses. She'd photograph the bus coming, and then she'd enlarge and say, oh, that's the bus I want, or that's not the bus I want. She's a really good problem solver. How can I get around this? What's the best way to do it?
You know, it's her journey, really. You know, we have to sort of, you know, we did tried to do practical things like centre the school in the centre of town, rather than keeping her local, to force her to sort of get out and get used to public transport, get the independence, try to push her independence upon her, and it wasn't too difficult. She took up the ball fairly quickly.
But I could feel the energy that you'd go up to some of your sports and you could feel that a coach was apprehensive or didn't want to include you or wanted you to do something different than everybody else. And that really annoyed me. I remember really not liking that. But I remember at athletics always feeling really confident. Like I remember coming up and not feeling different. I wasn't different because I had an eyesight condition. I was different because I was the girl who was fast and I was the girl who worked hard. And I remember Damien was always so good at that when I came up. I never felt any different.
I was surprised she didn't need much. In fact, she didn't need anything. She was always good. Maybe in a race, I might have to stand in the lane so that she could do her warm-up, something like that, but she needed very, very little. It was, as I said, because I was told, I wouldn't have known. And she had adapted, and it was early on at that stage.
That was really important when I was young, but I suppose when I got older and I was in school, that's where I probably struggled more with the more overt, oh, you should not do that, or you should kind of step back from that, or it's a bit much for you. And I found that really hard because school was really hard. When I think back on it, it was kind of I got on well in school in the terms that I had loads of great friends and I had my sport and I was bright and I was able, but school was really hard, really hard. It's just not set up for someone with a visual impairment. Just everything about the schooling system was tough. There was never an easy day.
I think when her friends started learning to drive, that was hard, knowing that she would never drive and always being dependent on public transport, which isn't always dependable, She really missed out on that. And she did say things to us like, well, could you just take me around a car park or something when there's no cars there and just teach me anyway? No, honey, you can't do that.
My eyesight is definitely much, much worse now than it would have been when I was diagnosed initially. So my eyesight is always deteriorating. There's an element of well, I don't know what vision I'm going to have tomorrow or next year or whatever. So why not take advantage of what I have now? This is just part and parcel of life for me. Well, my eyesight just gets worse. I can't do anything about that. My eyesight has helped inform how I deal with kind of challenges in athletics. The better I can fill my life with things that are meaningful for me, the less I'm concentrating or thinking about what I may or may not be able to do in the future.
You're representing your country in Brazil. How did you become a Paralympian?
I knew that my dream was to represent Ireland one day. I didn't know that it would be the Paralympics in a matter of years. But I suppose because my eyesight was deteriorating, there kind of had been questions at stages. Vision Sport Ireland had asked my parents would I get involved, and they were kind of no, she's happy out where she is.
We said, look, Orla is existing in the fully sighted world, and she's happy in that, and she's succeeding in that. So we're not going to move her into anything different.
We wanted her to stay in mainstream sports as long as she could, or as keep her involvement going. For a number of reasons. It sort of keeps her involved with her friends locally and things like that, and rather than driving off somewhere down the country for a competition, that it kept her rooted in the community here.
Kept the world as normal as possible for her. And then as time went on, her godmother, who was a very good runner, she had said to her about Jason Smith, she said, there's this guy from Derry and he has exactly the same things you have. And he's the most amazing runner.
He has exactly what I have. And, look what he's doing. She already had the love for athletics, but then it kind of gave her, a path that she could see, maybe I could actually go a bit further with this.
She sort of thought, God, maybe I could do that. Maybe I can still be a good runner and I can compete at a high level, even though I'm visually impaired,
You know, I think someone at one stage said to my parents, like, oh, look, you know, she's at a certain level. Maybe it would be worth linking in with Paralympics Ireland and seeing where she's at or where she might be for that. And so we linked up with them and then went through the process of classification. So I found out that my eyesight put me into the T13 category. And so that kind of spitballed things fairly quickly into like, okay, well, you're at a kind of a level where we think maybe this could happen in the next year. So like, let's put you into some of those races and those qualification processes and see where we go. And that was all through the Leaving Cert as well. So it was a busy enough time frame.
For me, the timing was, oh my God, no. You know, I was trying to concentrate on helping her get through her Leaving Cert, because clearly with revision and everything, I was doing a lot of the reading for her and revision with her. But all her focus was, you know, I want to make the Paralympics. I want to make the Paralympic team. So once she qualified on eyesight and then she qualified on time, she then had to compete for a place on the team. So she's literally in the middle of doing her Leaving Cert exams and she's racing.
I travelled out. I remember going to my first classification event. I was out at a Paralympic Grand Prix and, you know, listening to my Shrap picture. I'd recorded them on my phone, so I was listening to my Shrap picture, warming up, and I raced, and I remember going home and 2 days later sitting my Leaving Cert oral for the Irish. I think as well, I didn't want to get ahead of myself because I knew it was going to be a big ask to qualify, and it was a really high bar at that stage for me. So I was really, really hoping and I was optimistic, but I appreciated that I had a lot on my plate at the time and it might not happen.
I mean, she was only 18. She had no exposure to running at that kind of level. You know, the indoor track in Athlone was the biggest that she had ever run at, and suddenly she's catapulted into Paralympics.
I couldn't go to European Championships that year because they were on during my Leaving Cert. But I was still in the qualification window, so I could run competitions, but I obviously wasn't going to be able to travel to Europeans and be there for the week. So I remember doing my English paper and then coming up here to Santry to run a Dublin graded one of the nights. And like, you know, people were talking about, oh, I heard in the news the paper was this way or that way. And I was like, yeah, no, it was. And they were like, what are you doing here? If you did the paper this morning, why are you here? You know, I do remember the bit of the kind of the funny looks.
Would her time be good enough to get her selected for the Irish team? So I suppose that was the first hurdle. And there was great excitement here once she sort of realised that I'm in the frame for a selection here.
I remember the kind of the panic of it, and I remember it was really close. There was a couple of us who were really within like very small margins of one another in terms of the qualification, and just kind of leaving it. Then at that stage I was like, I've done everything I can, so just had to cross my fingers. And a couple of weeks later getting the phone call to say I had bagged what I think was the last seat on the plane for Rio it was huge. I was really inexperienced going in there. It was my first like major championships representing Ireland, and I did it totally wrong. I went the opposite way, you know, like right into the deep end with the games first.
To my dying day, I remember the small Q coming up on the screen when she made the time to make it through to the final. Yeah, well, that was magic. I think it was magic because, you know, we had made an effort to get there. We were in the stadium in Rio. There was a lot of Brazilian people around us, and you know, we were screaming, "Come on, Orla!" And the next thing we realised, everybody around us was screaming, "Come on, Orla!"
And she made the final, and I mean, it was just incredible.
That was like a medal to us at the time. You know, that was beyond her wildest dream to make the final.
I mean, that gave her a real thirst then.
But I knew I wasn't in a position to challenge for medals. I knew I was there. I was realistic, but I was kind of like, but that's what I'd like to do in the future.
And then another 2 years later, you're at the European Championships and you win 2 bronze medals, isn't it, in the 100 metre and 200 metre. And is it at that point that you say, well, now I've made it and I am an athlete?
Yeah, I actually found that Europeans really tough. I had been carrying injuries off and on. So that Europeans was 2018. So it was the year just before my ankle surgery. Yeah. So I was having bad issues with my ankle and my other foot.
She kind of knew more and did better and improved her time and had made her more hungry. And then she went to Europeans the following year in Berlin and she got 2 bronze medals, and it was like, oh wow. And one of them was a photo finish, which was hugely exciting. And you know, we just thought, this is amazing. And then injury, and that probably was the hardest thing, you know. injury after injury after injury.
It's a catch-22, you know, you're trying to go. Every time you get a little bit faster, you've pushed your body that little bit faster, and you're hoping it'll be okay.
As young bodies are sort of developing and growing, and you know, if you put too much pressure on them, you know, you can develop problems. And I think she developed one small injury with the foot, and then, you know, that led to other compensatory injuries. One led to the other. So like the left foot was bad, and then she was training on it, and then she was compensating on it, and then she developed a compensatory injury on the other side. And then
the more pressure she put on it, the worse it got. She saw one consultant after the other. They couldn't find things on scans. And then eventually it got really bad. She had so many knockbacks along the way. I don't know how she kept going. I mean, I don't know how she kept at it. She was disheartened at places, you know, and at times when things didn't come together for her, but she never gave up.
I felt like I was scrambling. Like I'd get through a couple of races and I'd go all right, and then I'd be in a lot of pain. I was just kind of managing them, and I felt, you know, I made it to Europeans and there was a big kind of sigh of relief. And then when I won the medals, they didn't really feel that rewarding. They just felt like a sigh of relief. I think it was because I knew I wasn't doing things right. I knew that wasn't how I wanted to win a medal. That's not how I wanted to represent myself, because I just knew I had more. Those medals for me, instead of being something that validated my career, they were something that were like, I feel like they were a real turning point for me in terms of like a learning lesson, that I was like, I can't keep doing things this way. If I want to call myself an athlete and I want to be able to put my best foot out when I step on the track, this isn't the way to do it. I just said, like, we have to go back to the drawing board here.
Most people yearn for just one passion in life. We've talked about sport a lot, but you have another big one as well, and that's the world of art. Talk us through that.
Yeah, I love it. It's just something I've always loved. I think it's a real privilege to have something like that you're so passionate about. And I think art has always felt like a real outlet for me. It's a space that I can express myself, I can experiment, I can just kind of free myself a bit and kind of hit that state of flow. And I think it's actually really helped inform my sport as well, because I think sometimes in sport you can get so caught up with the goal or an outcome, like this is the time I want to run, or this is the medal I want to win, and you're thinking about that the whole time, that you get so caught up in it, you aren't in the process in the way that you should be. And I think art, if you set out in art to make a final product or to produce something, you make crap. Like you never do anything good. And I think being able to be in a process of a practice, being able to experiment, to expand, to try things one way, try them another way, let the successes and failures inform where you go next, helps you to get to a final piece that really like resonates to you or speaks to what you were trying to accomplish.
In secondary school, she found her art classes very relaxing. Yeah, it was like an escape for her. She loved it. Loves it. Doesn't have enough time for it.
So I suppose the art that I make is mainly kind of video, distorted video, or kind of interactive installation spaces. So I like to create spaces where people kind of come into your artwork and they question what they're seeing or how they're seeing something. So I like to create visuals that are distorted, so that kind of leads to the distortion, but also that I would use like sensors, so that picks up on like how people move in a space, and that your artwork changes as people move through a space, and whether that's like the audio or the visual in front of them change in order to help them contextualize what's in front of them or what they're seeing. So for me, it's not really just about creating like a visual that represents how I see the world. It's more about creating like a situation or a scenario where people are questioning how they see the world.
Orla always did things a little bit differently to other people, and even in art and in school you'd get something to do, and she would want hers to be completely different to everyone else's. A lot of what artwork she does is related to, in some way or other, her visual impairment.
I kind of like the idea of someone coming into your work and being like, what's going on here, or what's this about, and going through that process of asking questions, of being curious. I think that, like, hunger for curiosity, I think you should always put the power back in a viewer's hands when they're looking at your work. Like, I think it's way more powerful and way more interesting, because you actually learn a lot more about your own work when you see how different people perceive it, how different people engage with it. And that to me is important. How I present my work is really informed by the viewer in a huge way.
Like, she has always had that as a sort of just a natural ability to see things and to imagine stuff and to create stuff. That was always part of her DNA, you know.
I think it really affords me an opportunity to play around with those kind of ways of seeing and this idea of the poor image. It has an outlet that's not like, okay, this is what I see and how the world looks to me. It's not an actual replication. It's more like a metaphor. It's like, how are you seeing the world around you, your attitude, your resilience, like how you encounter things. And I like that being able to create work that puts people in those positions is probably not the normal in terms of like how people feel around some art. I don't see a piece the same way. I have heard many people be like, the visual arts, like what? Like, I don't know, I think if I said I was in the performing arts or something, like people would actually question it less, but I think like the visual arts obviously inherently very visual, being visually impaired, you know, how do you do that? And I'm just kind of like, are we that narrow-minded? Like, there are ways, like it's a field of incredibly creative people, and we think that they won't be able to like find creative solutions to the problems.
She gets a lot of satisfaction from the artistic side and a lot of fun out of it, and the athletics likewise. You know, it's just something that fires her up, and so therefore it's not a chore for her. You know?
I use a software called Touch Designer to create those interactive and immersive spaces, and Touch Designer is basically like a programming software. So you basically create scenarios like, if this happens, then this happens. So it's sort of like you can create these situations and you can map visuals in spaces with projectors and stuff. The software is really technical, and there's a lot of like really small text in a really like small space. So when you're trying to find the commands or like the logic node or whatever it is, like that can be really hard. So I know that it takes me a lot longer to go through that process.
I just think it's really important, because as athletes, like our sports careers only last a certain amount of time, unfortunately. So it is realistic to be looking beyond that. And I don't want to get caught up in what's beyond it, because I want to be present in it and give it everything I have. But I think for me, where I can keep art in, it's really important, because it's kind of future-proofing me, but also it's an outlet that's important for me now. I think like being around creative people and being in creative spaces is good for my head. And like, as we spoke about earlier, performance on the track is mental and physical. So that mental side for me, I've understood that like a really important piece of it for me is creativity, or a space that kind of feels detached from athletics. It's a real like refuge for me.
Actually being involved in a sport, it's just as mental as it is physical. Could you talk to us about that balance of the talent that you physically have versus what's going on in your head at these precious moments?
Absolutely. I think, look, it absolutely is a mental game as well, because at the end of the day, you can be in the best physical position you've ever been in, and if you don't back yourself, it's not there. Like, do you know what I mean? You have to be able to be confident going into those blocks. Like, you've trained your whole life for what's potentially 11 and a bit seconds, you know? So it comes down to really fine margins, and you can't have a moment of doubt or uncertainty there.
I mean, it's total jeopardy. Like, anything can go wrong. You don't win every race you go out to. So, you know, and I suppose athletes in a way, they prepare for that eventuality, because, you know, you have to deal with, you know, sport in general is dealing with disappointment, and teaching kids how to deal with disappointment. And, you know, it's just part of the reality of sport and of life as well, I suppose.
Sport is cruel. All sports are cruel, you know. So much effort is put in by so many athletes to never achieve that dream, to never get their name in lights, it's absolutely heartbreaking.
I didn't have it all physically because of injury. So I would, you know what I mean? I'd be dealing with maybe a hamstring injury and I'd be going into a race and I wouldn't be totally sure, is the hamstring going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And I found it hard to back myself on the start line because I didn't know if I could back myself physically. As I came into the position where the physical wasn't an issue and I had kind of shifted those injuries, I realised that like all those years of that sort of mindset had actually created a bit of an issue for me, that I didn't want to be then like questioning myself, because I was like, if I've done all of this work physically and it's there, then I have to do the work mentally to be able to like back that up. The two of them have to go together. So being able to stand on the start line and like be able to say to yourself, like, I turned every stone I could. I did everything that I could. I've done everything I can. That's kind of gives you the mental strength to be like, well, right, okay, then there's no questions, there's no doubts. Whatever happens, happens. But like, I know I've done all I can in this moment, you know.
Am I right in saying that your old coach, Brian Corcoran, and his family were there to see you achieve what you did? Can you talk us through what that was like and your relationship with Brian Corcoran, who passed away a few years ago, your old coach?
I moved to Brian's group when I was maybe 16, kind of that stage where I was really like, I'd like to step up kind of my commitment to athletics, because I think there's something here and I really want to push it. And like, he took me seriously at an age where he had a group of senior athletes and I was 16. So he took me into the group at that stage, and that was kind of the start of our relationship. We were together, I think, probably 7 or 8 years or something like that. But unfortunately, the year of Tokyo, Brian became quite unwell and passed away while I was actually in Tokyo, which was really tough and made Tokyo fairly unpleasant, as you can imagine.
And she was doing well going into Tokyo. And her times were really good in training. And she was kind of hopeful. And then her coach at the time, possibly was dying of cancer. And that was hugely upsetting for her. She saw him the night before she went to Tokyo. And she actually called by his house, not knowing he was there, to leave something for him. And his daughter arrived at the house at the same time. So, oh no, you have to come in. Daddy wants to see you. So she did, and she held that all together, and the banter and the fun. And she came out into the car. And most unlike Orla, she just flooded with tears. And she said, I'm never going to see him again.
Unfortunately, we couldn't really support her properly through all that because she was in Tokyo and we were here. We couldn't be there. There was no easy way through that, you know. That was just something she had to do on her own, unfortunately. And she found it tough. She found it very, very tough. She was very close to Ryan. So
she went to Tokyo, and when she was out there, he died. She found that really, really difficult to be away from Rahimi Shamrock's family, away from all her running friends, away from his family, away from us. She was out there, she was very isolated. She found that very difficult. And she felt that other people out there didn't know him, didn't know the relationship they had. He was like a father figure to her. I think she'd had him for about 8 years. Sorry for getting upset, but that was really difficult. And we were worried. We were really worried about it. And then on the last day of training, on the training camp, before they went into the village, she damaged her quad.
Just like what seemed like out of nowhere. I was doing my full warm up. I was doing a stride out before I sprinted and just something went. And I said, oh, that doesn't feel right. I pulled up straight away and over to the physio, and then we discovered I had strained it. So that was just like another blow. I was like, oh my God, now I'm here. I've missed everything that's going on at home and the funeral and everything. I'm not even competitive. I don't even know if I can line up, let alone be in the mix. You know what I mean? I just, like, everything just crumbled in front of me. I don't think the strain was totally unrelated to the emotional kind of toll of everything that was going on. Like, of course, all of that stuff is connected. And I just remember really struggling at the time, being like, why am I even here? Like, what's it for?
Orla couldn't be at her best. Well, if it was me, I wouldn't be with that in her head, because I'm sure that's what she'd tell you that herself, but that's what she was thinking about.
At the start of that week, it was, I'm not even going to make the start line, you know, and she so wanted to make the start line for Brian and for Brian's memory. She made it to the start line, and I suppose that was the, you know, making it to the final in Rio was the measure of success. The measure of success in Tokyo was just making the start line.
And she wanted to run. She didn't know if she could run. The advice to her was, you know, Orla, you risk doing much more damage if you run, and seriously injuring yourself. But she said, for Brian, I have to be there.
It just sounds so surreal, because it's so opposite to how so many people are dealing with those moments. They're the biggest high performance moments of their life. They're primed, everything's perfect, everything's there. And I was like what felt like on the opposite end of the spectrum, which made it hard to be like, why am I here? But being able to line up and finish the race in one piece was a huge relief, for one, to be able to cross the finish line. And to be honest, I kind of felt like shit in the moment, which is like, feels really obnoxious to say, like you're on the biggest stage and you have this big moment and you just don't want to be there.
But she said that she knew Brian would have been proud of her for doing it. And she said, I did it for him. And yeah, and he had always such faith and such belief in her.
I kind of think then coming out of Tokyo, it gave me the perspective to be like, okay, I don't ever want to be in that position ever again. And I have to make really like hard and honest decisions to be able to put myself in a better position. I'm glad about how I handled it and managed it, because I think that's really ultimately what led to where I am now.
Just take us back, and I'm sure you've done it many times since Paris last summer, but the Paralympics, the 100 metres T13, the bronze medal. Talk us through that day.
Honestly, it felt like Christmas, like coming up to the day, like when you were a kid and you couldn't sleep because you were so excited for Christmas. That's what my race day felt like. I just remember feeling so excited and getting up to the stadium and being like, this is my moment. Like, I've worked for years and years and years. Now isn't the time to doubt myself or question the work. Like, I have to have confidence in what I've done. I have to believe in myself, because if I can't, who else can? So, yeah, it felt pretty special.
Eventually, her injuries, one after the other, settled. I mean, there were a few more after that, but they did settle down. And like coming into Paris, she was just in the form of her life.
She had got a good start. She had executed that initial drive face well. She got out, and you know, once she came past us on the track, we were about 2/3 of the way down. We could see she was in the hunt, like she was there. She was leading the race for the first maybe 20-30 meters. There was 5 girls in the race who were within 1/100th of a second of each other. So it could have gone anyway. She could have won the race, she could have come 5th. And it was that close. And
for her to run so well there was just a dream come true.
It took 2 world records to do it, you know, to beat her.
Afterwards, it was funny because of your high standards. There was an element of, was it regret that it was a bronze medal because you set out for the gold medal and the world record, and you had to come to terms with that, but also the whole country was celebrating your achievements.
Yeah, it is kind of funny as an athlete, because I think like you always set a bar high, like you always want to achieve more. And when I crossed the line, the first feeling I had was heartbreak. I was just like, oh God, like that's just not what I wanted to do. That's not what I thought I would do. I thought there was more there. But fairly quickly it did turn. I was just like, then it was kind of relief. I was like, oh my God, I won a medal. And I was sort of like, oh my God, I've worked for years. Like, I can't believe that. I would be wild not to like enjoy this moment and take it for absolutely everything that it is. And I'm kind of happy that I had that moment of disappointment, because that to me is like the fuel for LA.
She learned that actually she was happy with the bronze. It just fired her up to want more.
And to be honest, I think if I'd set out with the goal of coming 3rd, I might not have come 3rd. But because I set out with the goal of a gold, I think maybe that's why I won bronze. Do you know what I mean? So I don't think it's a bad thing to be like a little bit delusional about your goals and your dreams. Like that's what they're there for, you know what I mean?
It's one of those lifetime things, isn't it? How do you describe that? How do you put that into words? You can't really, it's just magic.
Like I just felt like something like you dreamed up. Like it was hard to put into words how it all felt, but it was really special. Getting
your reward and knowing that you know it just didn't happen. It didn't happen. You have to be dedicated. Your family have to be dedicated. Your coaches, your friends. And we're very proud of her. I am anyway, and the club is very proud of her. You know.
And whenever that day is that you do stop running for good, how do you want people to remember Orla Comerford, the athlete?
I think like medals and accolades are important because that's what breaks you through, and that's how people recognise you or understand you, and those things are really important to me because they're what matter to me. But I think if we're talking on a wider context of what I hope matters beyond that and beyond me, it's probably that message about like going after what you're passionate about and not caring what other people think about it. Like just really being true to yourself and finding your own voice and finding real confidence in that, hopefully.
We're immensely proud of her in terms of what she's achieved. But I think I'm more proud of how she's achieved it. The work ethic that she has developed, the amount of effort, the way she's dealt with the adversity. That actually, I'm more proud of that than I am of the medals, to be honest with you. And yeah, I just hope that continues for her. You know, in my eyes, she's a success whether she wins any more medals or not. Like in terms of how she has developed as a person, I think that's the real measure of success for me.